Hello, this video will be on how to set up a reflux. So we will have already set up our stir hot plate and glassware, and so we need some tubing on our reflux condenser along with a clamp. The tubing is going to be of two different lengths because one's going to go into the top of the reflux condenser and so needs to be slightly longer in order to reach the sink. Before attaching the tube into the condenser, you should take off the threads and push them in and secure tightly before screwing them onto the glassware. As I said before, the shorter side can go in the bottom as this just needs to reach the tap, and then the longer length of tubing can attach to the top and drain the water into the sink, as water is going to flow in through the bottom of the condenser up and out the top. Remember to screw on tightly as we don't want any water leaking out here. As previously outlined, we should always clean the neck out with some tissue or blue roll to make sure that the quick fit glass joint can make a good connection between the condenser and the round bottom flask. The condenser should be able to sit into the glass joint comfortably, and this security here comes from the tightness around the round bottom flask rather than clamping the condenser itself. What we actually do is set a loose clamp, a support clamp around the condenser, just to make sure that if it falls for whatever reason or it's knocked, it's going to be secured in place. So you can see here that this isn't tight against the glassware, as the thin walls of the condenser are quite fragile. You don't want to clamp it tightly, and what's more, if you are to clamp it, it tends to pull the glass joint loose, and so the condenser is not sitting into that quick fit glass joint there, and therefore you're going to have solvent vapors escaping out of that connection, and so it's going to affect the efficacy of your reflux. It's not going to heat very well, and you're going to be losing solvent. So we loosen that clamp and allow gravity to just sit that into the glass joint, secured by the tightness of the clamp around the round bottom flask. So on the longer tubing that drains out the top of the condenser, we secure it into the sink with a boss head, not winding it too tight so as to stop the water flowing out of it, but just enough so that it can sit into the sink. The bottom tubing then can be attached to the tap, and we need to make sure that is on firmly, as the water pressure will force it off otherwise. Before commencing your reflux, you need to slowly turn the water on, fill it up carefully so that we can see any leakages that may be present. We want to have a good flow rate of water through the system so that enough water is pumping through and kept adequately cold so as to condense our solvent vapor. As we've already added our reagents, we are ready to heat, and as shown before, we're using ethanol, which boils at around 80 degrees, so we set it at about 100, as some heat is always lost to the surroundings. We make a note of the time the reflux started, and that's not when it begins heating, but instead when we see solvent condensing on the side of the flask. After the reflux has proceeded, we then turn off the heat and lower the lab jack to remove the heat from the system and allow it to cool with the stirring still on and the condenser still attached with water in it. Then, once it's at room temperature, we can begin to disassemble the glassware as it was no longer hot. We can firstly remove the condenser and drain the water out of it into the sink. Make sure the water is obviously turned off. Make sure the top tubing is drained of water before pinching the bottom tubing, which is connected to the tap, inverting the tube and allowing the water to drain out the bottom of the condenser. Once you're happy that all the water has been removed, you can then remove the adapters from the condenser